Welcome to LRTV and this week's edition of Legends 15. Sitting next to me tonight is a man who epitomises the word legend, none other than the Honorary President George Anderson. Okay, George, welcome to the show. Great to have you here. You really do epitomise what it is to be a legend of any club. Interesting team sheet you've got here, George. We've got a side that you've put together made up of one player from the 40s, there's 4 from the 50s, 2 from the 60s, 1 from the 70s, 1 from the 80s. You obviously didn't think much of the players in the 90s. There was obviously less than a golden era for the club. And of course you've got 6 from the noughties. George, few people can have seen the change, seen as much change in the club as you have over the last 10 years. It's been quite an exciting time to be at Lasswade, hasn't it?
It has been, there's no doubt about that. The last few years in Lasswade have been the best of my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's physically as well. The ground's really changed, and with infrastructure, the new pitch, new stand, clubhouse is great. There's really a sort of boom time in the club, isn't it?
It certainly is. A big difference from the 46 to 50s.
Well, they were still golden years as well, I'm sure, though.
Mine.
So, George, this is an interesting team we've got here. We'll go into the boiler house first. We'll look at the front row. At the tight head, we've got a man who's very well known on the pitch every Saturday at the moment, none other than Dale Robertson.
That's correct, Dale. The player in the club that has possibly not played a full 80 minutes throughout the last few seasons.
But by Jove, he has an influence when he's on the pitch, though.
Very good influence on the pitch, yes, very good.
He's got an amazing set of hands for a front row forward, but that's pretty much taken his red these days.
That's taken his red, actually. He's a good pair of hands. When he gets the ball in his hand, he makes ground no matter where he is on the pitch. Unfortunately, he's inclined to throw these opportunities away.
Well, packing down next to him in the hooker's position, we've got Davy Pringle, player from the 1970s. Tell us a little bit about Davy.
Davy Pringle was one of the smallest hookers I have seen, and he could get very, very low. In these days, the props had to keep their shoulders up and support the hooker. And Davy Pringle could get a ball with his head nearly on the ground at times.
He wasn't smaller than Duncan Barr, was he?
He was smaller than Duncan Barr. And he actually left Lasswade and went to play for Melrose. And I don't think he did come back to Lasswade. I could be wrong about that.
Either way, he went on to a fruitful career from Lasswade. So propping down, actually the prop on the other side of Davy Pringle was with the favourite son, you could say to this stage, a British Lion, many caps for Scotland, and another than Peter Wright himself, playing in prop.
That's right, Peter Wright. We wouldn't need to say anything about Peter. He started his rugby at Lasswade and the minis and the middies, left Lasswade, went to Boroughmuir, and from then he went on to international standards. Peter actually has remained in contact with the club, and I meet him occasionally in Livingston. We have a good blether of the old days.
Yep, a real legend in his time as well. So into the boiler house. We've got 2 players from the 60s. How do you think these guys would have fared in today's team?
Very much, very similar to today's team actually, and Bob Knowles and Harry Robertson, 2 really strong, upright line-out players.
Real athletes as well, aren't they?
Very. That's it.
And in the back row, we've got some interesting contributions into the back row. Playing at 6, we've got Peter Abel, an able man himself, playing in the 50s.
Peter Abel, actually, yes, he was a very good wing forward. Peter could go into a ruck and come out with the ball in his hand every time. He had a massive pair of hands and very, very strong arms. Unfortunately, he died very young. And
a man that creeps into the 7th jersey, he can blag his way into anything really, I suppose, is none other than Gav Brown himself, the club captain at the moment.
I'll not say very much about Gav, but when he did come to Lasswade a few years ago, he brought a breath of fresh air to the club, and he did a lot in controlling the forwards and whatnot.
Yeah, well, most of these guys in the back row these days have got pretty good engines in them, and your choice of number 8 today is no exception. None other than Donald Hearn himself.
Yes, Donald actually was one of the best number 8s I've seen in the club for a long, long time. And he still is. Unfortunately, he's not been played this last season, but we hope to have him back next season.
I think his father's a bit miffed that he's not made it onto the team sheet, but his son has.
That'll be David and I finished.
Before he even started. Also, now we go to the linchpins, the two players that hinge the forwards and the backs together. And the pulling on the 9 jersey in your team, George, is none other than Clarkey himself, the current scrum half for the Firsts. Yes,
Neil brought a lot to the club as well, actually. When he did come, I can't remember what season he actually joined the club, but he was one of the best scrum halves I've seen as well. Probably one or two scrum halves further down the list actually will be a bit miffed at not being included, remember.
Playing at 10 alongside him, a bit of a legend in his own short lifetime at Lasswade, none other than Andrew Reid, better known as Rusty.
Yes, Rusty actually brought a lot to the club, and the 2 years he came to Lasswade, he controlled the game from start to finish every time he played, and he was a very, very great loss when he went away back to New Zealand.
Like most New Zealanders, George, they always look like they've got so much more time on the ball, and they're sitting in an armchair ride, really, aren't they, when they're on the pitch?
You can always tell a foreign player, actually, the way he stands on the pitch. His hands are out in front of him, ready to get the ball or go forward or whatever. And if you take a close look at the southern hemisphere, you'll see a lot of backs standing like that.
I think it will be an exceptional player if we see a better one than Rusty in the 10 jersey some time in the near future for Lasswade.
I would think so, actually. I don't see we'll ever see a Rusty again.
Yeah. Well, into the midfield, again we've got some contribution from the 2000s, from the noughties, and one from the 50s actually, pulling on the 12 jersey in your team is none other than the cornerstone himself, the straining post, Bernie Hennessy.
Bernie was another one who came to Lasswade actually with a breath of fresh air, controlled the backs, contributed a lot to every game he played in, and he played by example, and a lot of the young players took an example from Bernie, which was very pleasing to see.
Yeah, he's been quite influential since he came to the club, really, hasn't he?
He has been, yes.
He might have lost a couple of yards of pace since his time, but he still makes a few yards with the ball in hand.
He still goes on that field, actually, and he comes off a tired man. He puts a lot into it. He never stops.
Yeah. And George Sweeney, a player that you almost played with or did play with in the 1950s?
Yes, George Sweeney I played one or two games with, and he was one of the most versatile centres I've ever come across. He could make a break, almost as good as our ex-standoff, Scottish standoff, Townsend. You reminded me of him.
A real eye for the gap.
A really good eye for the gap.
And defensively, how did he fare?
He was a very good defensive player as well. If somebody passed him, he caught them.
Now we're getting near to the sort of the flying machine on the sides. We're in the back three, the impact players. And pulling on the 11 jersey, we've got Peter MacArthur, somebody you played with in the 1950s.
Peter MacArthur actually was a Scottish 100 yards in these days championship, and if he got the ball in his hand, nobody caught him. Unfortunately, his defensive quality is just slightly suspect.
Well, I suppose, but when you're rattling the scoreboard up with tries, some people can sort of sometimes let these things go. Playing on the right wing, we've got David Smith, another player from 1946.
David Smith was a very, very fast winger in these days. Another sprint champion, I can't remember exactly which, but he actually played for Lasswade, and then he left Lasswade and went to Petticook, because he lived in Petticook.
There wasn't a bus obviously running from Lasswade to Petticook then?
No.
Nor was there generous expenses. And finally, at the full-back position, we've got none other than Ian Shand, a player you're very fond of. He said he had fantastic ability and played with you in the 1950s.
Yes, Ian Shand was one of the, what would I say, underestimated fullbacks in the Edinburgh area at that time. He played 1 or 2 games for Edinburgh District, and it was always reckoned that if he'd played for the likes of Heriots, Watsonians or something like that, he would have got an international cap.
Yeah, but he was of that sort of quality.
He was that sort of quality. He was an excellent kicker. His touch kicking was immaculate. He very seldom missed touch when he went for touch.
Superb. Listen, that's a fantastic team. I'm sure there'll be much debate in the club after this. You'll be getting your leg pulled, I would think, George, about who you've put in, and more importantly, who you've excluded.
I think there'll be a lot of comments about it, particularly from some of the older members. 1 or 2 of them will be a bit miffed at not being included in there, I would think. But you'll have noticed that there's no one in that team from Lasswade's unbeaten season.
That's true, yeah. That's exactly true when I look at that, actually. Yeah. Well, listen, we've got the whole of the closed season to discuss and to have your leg pulled and be chibbed about not having people in it that should have been in it. George, thank you very much for your contribution. It's been great. And you can join us next time where we'll be meeting another legend from Lasswade to discuss their top 15. From LRTV team, it's good night and bye for now.